Well, up next, we have 20th Century Studios president Steve Asbell sat down with the Hollywood Reporter recently to discuss the future of their filmmaking division under Disney. Asbell seemed to mirror other Disney subsidiaries with its assurance that the focus on franchise films is the path of the future. They will likely continue franchises such as Avatar, the Alienverse, and Planet of the Apes, plus Kenneth Branagh's Agatha Christie mystery adaptations will continue, though it's not clear if Branagh is attached. Among other films discussed were a Master and Commander prequel, something with Die Hard, the next Predator movie, 2 are coming out already, and 1 is a secret, but how do we know about it then? And the possibility of a Speed 3. What's our take on the gigantic slew of films from 20th Century Studios?
I thought this was fascinating from a box office standpoint. So if you look at the franchises that 20th Century owns, they've made bank in the last few years with all of those franchises. So, of course, under the leadership of Bob Iger, Steve Asbell is going to keep doing sequels and stuff like that that will make them more money at the box office. I think that he talked especially about the Alien Romulus movie. He wants to see more of that. So he seems really hands-on with a lot of these projects. I also found interesting his answer to the question about how do you decide if something goes in the theaters or streaming, and he kind of danced around it, but the gist is that theater is still always the goal, but that streaming gives you this freedom to allow up-and-coming directors and maybe different, I'm going to use the word quirky, projects that can be what they want to be on streaming without the pressure of, like he said, how many screens, how many theaters. So I thought that was kind of cool because he will have been over a lot of the stuff that Hulu has been putting out. And then for me, the most exciting thing was to hear we're going to get more Agatha Christie adaptations. He didn't mention anything about Kenneth Branagh, so don't know that he's involved. It's in that little niche world that I like. It's very divisive, but I like it. And so I'm excited to see more of that. But just really the future is franchise and the future is sequels. And we'll see if they continue to ratchet up the quality, because I think that's what has been giving people a lot of the draw to go see these in the theaters. And then just continuing to harken back to the nostalgia factor that also is getting butts in seats.
Yeah. It makes me sad. We talk about it every time Disney has these same discussions, but like, I like at least he's giving a nod to like, we're going to keep doing original projects. They'll just mostly be on streaming, because I do think there is a world, and we're in that world now, where there's tons of original movies coming out on streaming all the time, and every once in a while one will catch fire. But there just used to be you'd go to the theater. I mean, I remember when I was a teenager, I would go to the theater not knowing what I was going to see, like I'd just go to the theater and be like, hey, oh, that one looks interesting, let's just go, and that just doesn't exist anymore. It feels like it's a lot more, everything's a franchise. We know it is in the theaters. There's no surprises, no weird indie things. I mean, not none, but it's less and less and less, because franchises are ruling every week in the box office. And if there is a interesting niche thing, it normally only lasts a few weeks in the theaters, if that. So it bums me out to hear this, but it is the world we're in. And I guess the two things that bother me are the idea that you can't just walk in and just bump into a movie you didn't expect, and you can on streaming, but then you don't get the experience of watching something interesting and new and different with an audience,
I think that's subjective, though, because I see your point, but I too see the opportunity for more unknown creatives to have an opportunity for 20th Century to put their film out and to have that name attached to releasing it, rather than them trying to do it themselves or do it independently, which would be really hard to get noticed. So I think there can be that aspect to it. If you're somebody who's not super well known, here's a gigantic company willing to put your project out there on their streaming, and maybe it catches fire, kind of like the Prey movie is a good example. That was put on streaming for different reasons, sort of, but it was huge. And so now if they're going to do another one, it's going to be a theatrical release. So it's a grain of salt, but I think there's a little bit of truth to that too.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah, one of my former colleagues mentioned something a while ago when this wave of remakes started to come up. And it's about how basically a lot of Hollywood has just had trouble coming up with new ideas, and the new ideas that they want to do are just so risky that they don't want to invest in it. So why invest in something with a new name when you can take something with the name that you have and a cast that people love, and then just basically like piggyback off of that just to have that as an excuse to write a new story. And the philosophy was really interesting, but then it comes down to the studio side of things getting a little too greedy on, you got to throw in all the nostalgia, you have to throw in all the references, and we're going to pull people in like just off of that. I feel like that is a disservice to the original creators and to anybody who is getting involved in these films, hoping that, you know, their career could take off or these stories could take off. I feel like if you are going to do this, you have to take the time to come up with storytelling and delivery. The two newest Ghostbusters and Top Gun Maverick are kind of my best examples of that, where it's like, you kind of know where the story's going to go, but the way that they shape it, the delivery of it, the way that you care about these characters and are still on the edge of your seat in that theater experience, if you can't confidently make sure that your audience is having that experience, it's not worth ruining like the big name that a lot of these films have had over the last 3-4 decades.
Yeah, it is tricky, and I think society is starting to buck against the idea of the cookie cutter franchise. I mean, the numbers are there to support that. If you look at the numbers for the box office over the last few years, I know that we have had other extenuating circumstances like strikes and COVID and all these types of things, but franchises are not what they used to be in the theater. They're not pulling in the billion-dollar routine box office numbers that they used to. They're still successful for sure, but still, it's not as of a shoe-in as it used to be, right? It is a line you have to walk where you have to take a thing, you have to find a very like particular middle ground where you're developing a new set of characters in maybe a different time or a different space, but you're still attaching it to the IP. And one of the franchises that was mentioned here was Alien, and I think it's a good example, right? It's like Alien has a set of fans, it has a strong IP, so they create Alien Romulus, which is this new thing. It's in this new kind of space. It connects itself to the old stuff, but it develops a new set of characters. When it went to the box office, did it blow the doors open? No, but it was moderately successful, and it did well. And so whenever you're looking at the future, you're saying, all right, the reason we're going to make another one of these is because we are assuming that when it goes on streaming, that's where it will build its audience, right? Like people don't pack the theaters for it, but whenever they go home and they hear, oh, you liked it, I heard it got good reviews, like all that type of stuff. Then when it hits digital or when it hits a streaming service, they click play, right? And they watch it at home. They're like, oh, I really do like this. So then the play is, for at least 20th Century and all these other studios, is whenever you do decide to make that sequel, now you're going to pull in that bigger audience, right? Like, Kaylee, you mentioned Prey. Like, that's that's a perfect example, right? It's like, if we're going to do Prey 2 and we're going to throw Amber Mid-Thunder back in there and do it again, we're going to have a big box office because we've built the audience off the big screen, right? We built the audience on the small screen. So there is a strategy there. And I think Predator and Alien, like these are good examples of that, where, you know, you're not going to see this thing. You're not going to see Alien Romulus go to the theater and just make like hand over fist hundreds of millions of dollars, because it is, you know, you're kicking off a new thing. But you still can count on the longevity of this project, and this can kind of kick off a new age of fans that you can build outside of the theater, and then get them to come back to the theater when it's time. But also, too, I did want to point out, Matt, you mentioned it in the read, that like they filmed a secret Predator movie. Okay, yeah.
He
so
said there's two. Is it Predator or Alien? Or whatever.
No,
there's two movies. One they know about, and one he wouldn't talk about. So
yeah, well, we know for sure they're doing a Predator with Elle Fanning, because that's been confirmed. Like, we know that's happening. But then he was like, "Yeah, we're doing that one, but we also made another one that's coming before that one." I was like, "You what? Like, you shot a secret Predator movie? Like, okay." So that's.
And I think one is streaming and one is theatrical.
Yeah. So exciting times. I mean, if you're a fan of those franchises.
Are there any examples of I guess a movie franchise going from TV, like streaming, to theaters? like in a subsequent sequel. I definitely understand what you're saying, Jay. That could be a path, but I can't think of one. Like I've seen TV shows get movies made, like Firefly to Serenity to the Peaky Blinders movie, which I don't know if that's going to streaming or theaters.
I mean, we're going to see like The Mandalorian hit the big screen.
Mandalorian, great call. Good call.
You know, I mean, it's Star Wars, so it's not exactly the same thing.
Yeah,
but
and again, it's a TV show turning into a movie. I don't know that I've ever seen like it almost feels like, because of the way sequels work, and a lot of times they're cash-ins. You know, they're like Zoo was saying, it's like you're using the franchise name to make something new, and you're not necessarily giving it the respect it deserves. Sometimes you're just using the franchise up, and so sometimes there's diminishing returns with sequels, artistically and financially. And so I don't know that I've ever seen that, like, sort of streaming hasn't been around that long, but like that leap from a TV movie that the sequel gets turned into a theatrical release. Like, I can't think of anything that's ever happened. Not to say that it can't, but it just sort of like, maybe like a reimagining down the road happens where you get like, you know, like a Star Trek. You have Star Trek movies or Star Trek TV show, and then like 15 years later, they're like, we should turn that old thing into a movie, you know? Like, that kind of thing's happened in the past.
The closest thing I can think of is WandaVision and Multiverse of Madness, where they took a story that started off streaming and took that to a
theater.
And that's still gray area, but that's
except it didn't start there. It started in you know, Civil War, right. like you know, way back in Ultron, and then has gone through.
This isn't the same thing because, I mean, it's not. But I always think of Spider-Verse whenever I think about this trend, because it's such a good example of doing it. The first Spider-Verse movie did not have a huge box office. It made $393 million worldwide. Okay, so that's a very modest box office for an animation film. But what happened is it got great reviews. People talked about it. It hit streaming, and everybody watched it, right? Like, people started watching it in droves on streaming. So then when you finally are ready to tee up the next one, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, well, that movie made almost 700 million worldwide. So, I mean, you've just have taken to that huge step because you built your audience out of the theater for a couple years. You really built it up, and then that appetite was there for that sequel. So it's just, you know, the recipe's there. It's just you kind of have to nail down, like, okay, what are we comfortable with getting in the box office, and then what are we comfortable with like a sequel? Like, you don't want to see diminishing returns,
right?
But you also got to keep those budgets down, and I think that's like when we talk about Venom here in a little bit. Did Venom destroy the box office this weekend? No, but its budget was pretty low, like, compared to superhero movies, and so Sony's going to look and go, nice, you know, like, cool. We made our money back and then some. So you kind of have to think about just like this new age that we're in. We're probably out of this. We're out of the woods of like the gigantic $200 million superhero smash movie that makes $1 billion. You know, like you get your Deadpools and stuff like that every once in a while, but that's not the norm anymore like it used to be.
Yeah, it's not going to be a guarantee.
And it's not a bad thing. It's just that's the age that we live in now. You know, it's different now.
Well, and I think the model you talk about with the Spider-Verse, I think that's actually a pretty standard model of, if you make a really good first movie, the second movie will do really well in theaters, even if, and oftentimes better in theaters, even if it's critically not the best one. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of times people are like, oh, the sequel was a little disappointing, but like, it got butts in seats because it's relying on the advertising that the first one did for it. Like, that happens commonly. I think there's just a mental block, I think, for people, at least for me, and I think a lot of people, you just think of a franchise on your TV as a different level of franchise, and seeing that leap is sometimes, I think, hard. Obviously, those lines are being blurred all the time now, but like, it used to be a much harder line. So, I don't know, just interesting to think about. I'm interested to see if that model you're talking about works out, I guess.
Yeah.